Welcome to Podcast by TechNation. This podcast series is focused specifically on the biomedical and HTM industry. Episodes are added monthly, and each episode is eligible for one continuing education credit from the ACI. At the conclusion of this episode, you'll be able to access a link that will take you to a quick survey. You can download your certificate once you submit the survey. Before we begin today's podcast, I'd like to invite you to save the dates for our upcoming HTM Mixers. We'll be in Milwaukee on July 14th and 15th, and in Kansas City on September 9th and 10th. Please visit htmmixer.com for details, registration, and our steps to a safe and clean meeting environment. Podcast by TechNation would like to thank our sponsor, Multi Medical Systems. When you're in the business of protecting the health of patients, you don't have time for malfunctioning medical equipment. You need a reliable partner that can provide expert repair to ensure you have patient-ready equipment that meets or exceeds OEM guidelines and regulatory requirements. For more information, please visit multimedicalsystems.com. In this episode, we are joined by Binseng Wang, a well-known leader in the HTM industry. Binseng, you may begin whenever you are ready.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to HTM Insider. We're excited today to bring you Binseng Wang as our guest today on the podcast. Binseng, I know that you're well known in the industry and you don't necessarily need an introduction, but for some of our listeners who might not know you, can you introduce yourself and your experience in the clinical engineering world?
Thank you for having me today, Cheryl. Again, my name is Binseng Wang. I'm currently the Vice President of Program Management at Sodexo HTM. Don't let the title fool you. I'm nothing but I said to Cheryl before, big knucklehead, nerd, if you will. And for those who does not know me well enough, I'm actually a Brazilian Chinese, still trying to speak English fluently, especially with a Southern accent.
Very good, Binseng. Well, as you know, we're here to discuss the right to repair issue that's, really affecting the HTM clinical engineering world right now. So I would like to ask you, what does right to repair mean to you?
Okay, well, my understanding is that this is a collective effort of individuals and companies who want to perform repairs and other maintenance services on products that they either own themselves or own by others and need information and sometimes material resources to perform this kind of services from the manufacturers. Let me give you a couple of examples here. One is auto repair shops that are performing the simple things like oil change, engine repairs on cars and trucks produced by the major automakers. Another example closer to what we do is the in-house or independent service organizations that repair medical equipment used in clinics and hospitals for patient care.
Yeah, and I like the example you just gave on the vehicles because it's true. We trust a lot of independent service organizations to change our oil, our brakes, and our families are in those cars. So it's just as vital to that right to repair that we're trusting maybe an outside person. So who's qualified, that maybe we ought to start trusting more of our in-house owners of medical equipment to do their own repairs as well. So that's a great point. Did you see when it started in the medical industry, do you think it became more prevalent because of COVID and the pandemic? Or did you see any type of movement before the pandemic?
Oh, no, this started well before the pandemic. I think this issue, as I mentioned, I saw way back when, and for at least the last 30 years, there have been discussions about this. The pandemic just really accentuated the challenge, as I'm going to probably discuss with you a little bit later. So I'm not going to uh, uh, go there yet, but I think just made the issue a whole lot clearer for everyone to see.
Yeah, and we work with a lot of in-house programs, third-party companies like Sodexo, smaller biomed companies across the US. And, I feel it's different for every group, but I want to know, in your opinion, how does it really affect the biomed teams that are working in the hospitals?
I believe everyone is equally affected by this. And as I mentioned earlier, the pandemic made this issue extremely clear to everyone because many manufacturers were either unwilling or unable to send their service team to the hospitals to perform repairs or even scheduled maintenance during this period of time. Some because there were travel restrictions and some because they wanted to protect their own employees. So the repair and scheduled maintenance of the critical medical equipment that is needed for the care of the COVID patients fell on the shoulders of the on-site teams. Doesn't matter whether it's in-house employed by the hospital or employed by the independent service organizations. And some manufacturers were cognizant of the tenuous situation. They actually opened up and gave us some information and sold us some parts to do this. But others were still reluctant to do so, alleging that you folks are not properly trained, this is unsafe for the patients, etc., etc. But the bottom line here is that we all had to pitch in to make the equipment work reliably, safely. Otherwise, many more people would have perished in this pandemic. There is almost no diagnostic therapeutic service that can be provided to patients without some type of instrument. Even a simple thermometer to see whether you have fever, to start thinking about maybe you were infected by COVID or something, that is a piece of equipment, right? That's
Right.
technology.
Mhm.
And to go on and go take a sample from your nasal parts to the laboratory to see whether indeed you were infected by COVID or not, and then later on to infuse liquids into you with medication, hopefully not going to happen to you, Cheryl, by all means.
Right.
If someone gets really serious, you may need a ventilator even. And all those things are medical equipment that have information technology involved, and the need to keep those things safe and effective. All those things need some type of calibration, verification of function, and maybe replacement of wearable parts. So all this is really critical for the entire healthcare industry, and ultimately, to be honest, to the patients out there. And I include myself among those patients because I'm old, I can get sick and I need help.
So do you think the manufacturer representatives and the manufacturers is just about money?
Not all manufacturers are against the right to repair.
Right.
Actually, the majority of manufacturers are in favor and have released information, parts, etc. to us. It's just a small number of manufacturers. Unfortunately, this small number tends to be very large companies and have a lot of products in the hospitals, and they are reluctant to release the information and make quite a bit of allegations that unfortunately have not been proven. there's no real evidence out there of serious risk to patients or caregivers. And so these are the ones who are really holding up the progress and better care for the patients. So it is not everyone out there. Let's be very clear. And paradoxically, I want to raise another point here. These same manufacturers, the ones who are reluctant to share information, they operate in other countries, which is very common, right? And for example, in the European Union, there is a law that requires them to share this service information since 2018.
Wow.
So why the Europeans deserve to have that information where the Americans don't have the right to that information? That is really astounding to me, because I cannot imagine that life of the Europeans is more valuable than the life of Americans here.
Right. I agree. I wasn't aware of that, Binseng. And, that's a good point. It's a good precedent that hopefully our legislators see, and that we're able to make some changes here in the US soon. So if you were to say there was one myth about the right to repair, what would be that myth that you could debunk?
Well, the myth, actually, I really don't pretend to be the one to debunk here, because actually it has been researched intensively by the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, per direct mandate of the Congress of the United States. The FDA was asked by the Congress to investigate this allegation made by some manufacturers, as I mentioned, and FDA did a very extensive study and published a report. The report was provided to the Congress because it was asked by the Congress, and concluded, let me read the sentence so I don't misquote here. It said that the current available objective evidence is not sufficient to conclude whether there is a widespread public health concern related to servicing of medical devices, including by third-party services, that would justify imposing additional different burdensome regulatory requirements at this time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not something that I have been able to prove, or other individuals, associations, or colleagues of ours did. No. This is the government itself did extensive studies from their own data and data available in public from other sources like Agri Institute, Joint Commission, etc., and concluded there is no objective evidence.
You're right. I read that report, and I feel the same way. I share your point of view on what was in that FDA report. So speaking about the legislation, the FDA, have you seen any political barriers from your point of view that are something that might not cause a win to the right to repair in the legislation?
First, I don't think this is really a political issue.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In the sense that being a partisan issue, or it is issue that would a part of our population would be against because their liberties or their rights are being infringed or something like that. The reason for me to say this is very simple, because we have several states right now that have such a bill introduced into the state assemblies. And some bills were actually sponsored by Democrats, whereas in other states, the same or very similar bill have been introduced by Republicans. So this proves that this is not a partisan issue. Okay, this is an issue that involves, on one hand, the manufacturers, the few manufacturers that are against releasing such information and material, and the people, on the other hand, that work in hospitals, either employed by the hospitals or by third parties, to try to provide good services to the patients. And unfortunately, like any political decision. This is a political decision in the sense it's a political process to introduce a bill and get it approved, enacted, and all that. The process is subject to lobby by both sides, by all stakeholders in this case. So in this case, unfortunately, the reality is that the stakeholders who are better organized have more money to lobby the decision makers are the ones likely to win the argument despite of the merit sometimes not being there. And we have seen this in some other cases, as you are well aware. The hospitals, in-house service teams, as well as the independent service organizations, tend to be small to medium-sized companies that don't have the lobbying capabilities to fight against such pressure from the manufacturers. And that's where I think I'm seeing the most barriers.
Yeah. We had Kevin O'Reilly from US PERG on yesterday, and he gave us some advice on where the BMETs can go to maybe join the movement. That being said, he suggested writing your senator, your congressman. He has a letter that you can, sign. What is your thoughts on how the BMET community, how one HTM individual in a hospital in the middle of some state can help with this movement? Do you think that that matters from them to help, for them to help, or what?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I have written many letters, but I don't think that people necessarily read the letters. And I am a illustrious unknown person to them, right?
Right.
So I don't think that's enough. Okay, it's necessary, but not enough. I really like to ask every one of our colleagues out there, professional colleagues, to approach a legislator, someone from the legislator's staff, or friends of theirs or relatives of theirs. Imagine you may have someone whose uncle happened to be a state House member or senator, whatever is the case. Reach out and talk to them, because very often they don't understand the issue that well, because after all, medical field is a field that is highly specialized. They probably listen to their doctors, but not necessarily other people. And so they are unaware of the issues. For them, it's easy for the manufacturers to bring up the typical FUD. FUD means fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Right? When they
Right.
say, well, this could hurt someone, then the legislators say, well, I don't think I want to push this because this is not probably something good for me to do. Another venue, another opportunity that I would like to call attention of my colleagues is to reach out to their hospital leadership, and through their hospital leadership to go to the local chapter or state organization of the American Hospital Association, American Medical Association, because those groups have strong lobbies. They obviously understand the issues because they are the ones who need the tools that we help them uh, keep in good, safe, and reliable conditions, right? So they can go and talk to the legislator, because if they are in favor of the right to repair legislation, we have a much higher chance of getting this passed.
Yeah, I agree. And it's coming up soon, right? It's the middle of April that they're
Yes,
going to.
many states have such bill in consideration in discussion right now.
Yeah. I think sometimes we always feel that we're so busy and we're so small and our voice can't be heard. But I think you're a shining example of, as long as you keep, telling the story, right? And sometimes somebody's going to listen. And I think that's important right now, is that HTM staff across the US feels empowered to tell their story. right? Because they're the ones on the front line. And we've seen it, you know, ventilators in hospitals that can't be on patients, beds in hospitals that can't be on patients because they're broken. And you're waiting on the manufacturer to come in and repair them. So we've seen it. Um, if you could write the legislation, right, what would it say?
Well, first, Cheryl, I would like to thank you for calling me a idealist, a Don Quixote, maybe tilting the windmill. But I admit sometimes I'm a dreamer and I really like to see where not necessarily individually, but if I can get my colleagues to collaborate, we can do something uh, good for the collective, or
Mm-hmm.
basically everyone out there. Uh, and certainly, I don't think I'm capable of writing such a legislation or anything like that. But I would like to suggest everyone to talk to their friends and people who can influence such a legislation to think about three basic points, uh, just very simple things. First is to provide the service information, instructions, how to perform those services without revealing any trade secrets uh, and at the cost of production. This is nothing really new because there are other medical devices that the FDA has actually such requirements. For example, for lasers, there is specifically requirement for manufacturers to provide that information here in the United States. It's a FDA regulation. Okay. And second, if the equipment has some type of software to provide a passcode or access key or something like that to access the error codes messages generated by machine. It's like equivalent to that car red light that I mentioned, that you can go to a Pep Boys and have someone plugging a device and read off, say, hey, this is the problem you have. That's what you need to do. We need that kind of access. This is not trade secret. This is nothing really special that manufacturers will lose their patents or anything like that. Finally, for the manufacturer to sell us the proprietary replacement parts, service tools, calibration test equipment that is specialized for that particular device. Again, they are obviously entitled to charge a reasonable price for those parts and test tools, but we need access to that. And we don't want to uh, 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 make them lose their rights, if trade secrets or nothing like that, or even the money that they invested in doing those things. So we are perfectly willing to pay for those things at a reasonable price, obviously, and ultimately this is going to help everyone. Even the manufacturers, if you ask them to think for a minute, they will also realize that sooner or later, some of them, the people, not the company, are going to be patients as well. And they need help, it's just like everybody else need
Point.
medical care, right?
Yep, great point, Binseng. I mean, I know a lot of the people that I've come across, everyone is always very conscious about the equipment could possibly be used on myself or my family, right? And I think if maybe manufacturers looked at that way, maybe this is going to be on my mom, my grandma might be on this ventilator. I would want it to work perfectly, right? And
Absolutely.
you don't want to hear that we don't have any more ventilators. We need to wait for a representative from the OEM to come out to repair it. I think they would be stomping the ground, so to speak, and looking for someone to repair that machine to save their loved one's life, right?
Absolutely.
Yep. So we're coming to the end here, Binseng. I really appreciate you joining us today, but I have a question for you. So we're doing every segment a wow, a word of wisdom. Now, you can use a few words, but I'd like you to tell us what is your word or words of wisdom that you can leave with our listeners and our viewers today?
Well, in my Don Quixote's role, I would say, hey, friends, colleagues, let's take up the challenge by thinking this way. Let's challenge the current status with audacity. Challenge with audacity is what I would recommend everyone to think about. We must think outside of the box. We cannot just say, okay, this has been the way it is being for years and we just conform to it. We need to challenge the status quo. And so challenge with audacity is what I would recommend.
That's perfect. That is you. And I do have to say, and we were just talking earlier before we started, that I did read your book, your latest book. It was very intriguing. I didn't do so well on the test, but now I get it. I understand it a lot better. It's a great read. It's a short read, but it's one that I've had to read twice to grasp it. But we really appreciate you joining us today. And are you attending the MD Expo?
No, unfortunately, right now I'm not allowed to travel unless for essential business needs. But I'll certainly be participating in future events. And if they are going to do that show in part virtually, I will certainly be attending the virtual portion.
Very good. Well, thank you, Binseng. It's been a joy talking to you today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you, Binseng, for a great presentation. If you enjoyed today's podcast episode, you might enjoy our ongoing webinar series, Webinar Wednesday. You can find a calendar of upcoming live webinars as well as an archive of our on-demand webinars at WebinarWednesday.live. To obtain your certificate for 1 CE credit from the ACI, please remember to click the link located below this podcast title to complete today's survey. If you have any questions, you can reach us at webinar@mdpublishing.com.